Welcome, everybody, to a very special episode of the Book of Law podcast. I am really excited today to welcome our special guests, Colonel Maier and Colonel Annette Torrisi, who actually, they can say that they knew Patrick when. So you've heard my experiences with Patrick over the past year or so, but you're going to get some really good intel over the course of this episode. So I'm not going to go into details of their background because they're going to share that with you themselves. But what I'd like to do is share with you why I'm so excited about this. So you've heard us opine on leadership from a corporate perspective, from a smaller company perspective. Because fewer than 1% of Americans serve in the U.S. military, what that means is most of us don't get a chance to really experience and learn from the qualities and capabilities of leadership that are established in the military, which is so unfortunate, right? Imagine that 99% of Americans are missing out on learning from the amazing leadership that has been created. I personally was privileged back, I think it was around 2011 when I was at AT&T. This was just after the drawdown from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was part of some really interesting corporate initiatives to essentially help establish more civilian career opportunities for transitioning service members. And I had an opportunity to learn from really all levels of multiple branches of the military, right from White House joining forces to offices within the Pentagon, to veteran services organizations, to local military installations. And what I saw was really, really interesting, because I think one of the unfortunate stereotypes that exists about military leadership is, I wouldn't want to hire a soldier because they just are trained to follow orders and they can't think for themselves, right? Have you heard that? And it couldn't be further from the truth, because the military folks that I came to know and learn from were incredible in their versatility and their adaptability, right? So what I understand is in the military, you kind of learn the basic building blocks and principles of leadership and collaboration and interaction. And then one day you can be handed a book and say, this is your job tomorrow, figure it out, right? So people are thrown into situations that have incredible sense of urgency and consequences, and they figure it out, which is, imagine if we had more of that in corporate America, right? In the businesses that we're all running today. And so I think what we'll hear from Maier and Annette today during this conversation is stories of how they've grown their leadership, how leadership kind of can be adapted outside the military in more civilian or more pedestrian types of contexts. And we'll really understand and learn from some of the challenges that they experienced and some of the leadership mechanisms that they have put into practice. So I am so excited for this conversation, and I'll turn it over to Patrick to tee up the introductions.
Thank you, Rachel. That was awesome. You actually withheld some of the really excellent, cool things and opportunities you had to meet with some really senior people at DoD to talk about that topic. That'll have to be for another time. But thank you for what you did for the literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that got jobs because of your care, helping transition, people out of the military. It's awesome. So I still see Maier after all these years later. We served together from 90 to 92-ish. Maier and I took a trip overseas together. Annette was on that team. I don't hold people to the level of appreciation much that I do these two people. I learned as a 19-year-old in uniform, far from home, really what leadership looked like. And I didn't know what it was before. Most 19-year-olds don't get a view that up close and personal to that level of a command structure. I had a really unique job. I wasn't in a line unit. I got pulled out to work very closely with Maier. And when I say closely, we spent every waking minute together for over a year, 10 months of those deployed overseas in really tight confines. And I got to see her emotionally, mentally, physically manage around 1,000 people far from home, doing various jobs, different disciplines. Annette's role in that, she was our intelligence officer. I learned from Maier early that, you can reach out inside organizations to seek talent and pull it into you. And she was really good at that. She collected amazing people around her to go manage really complex situations in a really dangerous area. And I watched her rallies people morale. She was part boss, of course, like everyone knew who ma'am was and everyone towed the line, but everyone respected her so much personally. We'd run through a wall for her head first. And the mantle of leadership can be lonely. And I had a front row seat every day watching her process what her direct reports like Annette were telling her, what her boss at Brigade was telling her, what was happening with the surrounding units. And all of that stuff can be transferred into civilian employment and civilian organizations, whether it's a not-for-profit or large companies, small companies. I learned a lot. So when I still see her, even on camera, I get a lump in my throat, man. Like, you're amazing. And I reached out to a bunch of people that said, hey, Colonel Maier is going to be on our podcast. Like, oh my God. Like, all the names that you both know are very excited to hear what you have to say. I didn't embarrass you at all, but this is going to get a really unique audience of people from y'all's past and present that are so excited to hear from you. So I can't thank you enough for volunteering to take your personal time and professional time to spend with us so we can ask you a couple of really cool questions. And I know people will learn from it.
Okay, well, I'm going to start out with telling you that I was born and raised on a little farm in Michigan. And from the first day I went to a one-room country school for kindergarten, I came home and told my father I wanted to be a teacher. And that's what I planned to do my entire high school and college career. Unfortunately, when I graduated from college, there were way more teachers than there were jobs. So, and I didn't have enough money to go back to school, so I decided that I would join the Army. And I can tell you the story of how I got roped into that. But I joined in 1973 when women were still in the Women's Army Corps, which was a little bit separate but equal, somewhat equal. And I happened to join the very first class of WACs that at the end of WAC officer orientation, we were going to go off to the branch schools. So for the first time, women were wholesaling going out to the military police, the signal corps, the intelligence, and so forth. So I was lucky enough at that point to go to the military police corps and end up in Korea. I decided I was going to do 2 years, go back to school with a GI Bill, and I'd be fine. Unfortunately, I found that I really loved what I was doing. I loved being with soldiers, and I loved leading people. So I was lucky enough through my Army career to command at the detachment, the company, the battalion, and the brigade level. And I culminated my career as the commander of the only airborne military police brigade in the United States Army, and jumped out of perfectly good airplanes for a very long time. I'm paying for that now. And after that, I went off and worked at a private security company for about 12 years and was invited to come back to the United States Army for a couple of years and command the same brigade while the commander was off deployed, but the majority of his unit was back in CONUS. So I got to do that for 2 years, and after that I went off to Hawaii, where I am still living. Started my own security company and did background investigations for a number of years. And about 2 years ago I retired, and I generally just do whatever I want to do every day.
Well deserved, man. Well deserved. And a hell of a career. You're not going to mention Michigan, like the school you went to? Before the call started, I heard your phone ring, and wasn't that the fight song for your school?
Well, I did. The phone did ring, and that was a fight song for Michigan. I did not go to school there, but I am a huge Michigan fan, being from Michigan. But and go blue, and we'll crush Ohio State again this year. So,
thank you, Mary. Annette?
Thank you, Patrick. I was born outside of Chicago. That's where half of my family is, and at a young age, around 4, we moved back to upstate New York. I was not born and raised on a farm. I really didn't live anywhere more than I think the first time I lived somewhere more than 4 years was after I got out of the Army. So my whole childhood was very, um, it wasn't an easy time. And so coming out of when I was in high school, the Army had that great campaign, save a dollar, get a dollar, this GI Bill, the hope of going to college. And that's what drew me to the military, because if I can save a dollar, I was thinking I can get through this college thing. And so I went to enlist. And when I went to enlist, people talk so bad about recruiters, but my recruiter in hindsight was just incredible. I took my ASVAB, took all kinds of tests, and he said, "You really need to go in and be an officer." And I was like, "I don't want to be an officer. I want a college education." And he's like, "Okay, let me teach you a little bit about this thing called the military." And because of his guidance, I went and applied for scholarships. My high school counselor helped me, and I was very fortunate. I was offered, 4-year full scholarships from both the Air Force and the Army, but I had to go in as an engineer. And I can do math, and, I could do it, but I was missing some math credits. And I thought, I want to be an English major. I want to maybe be a lawyer someday. I want to work with words. And the Air Force said, absolutely not. And the Army said, sure, go ahead, change your major. So that's how I ended up on my path with the military. I did my, I went to college for 4 years, first person in my family to actually, get a higher education. And then I asked for the reserves. We can talk about it later. But when I went in the military, the Army was going to send me down to Fort Bragg as a parachute rigger. So when I was in college, every summer I thought, let me learn a little bit about this. And every summer I went to Army training. So I went to airborne school my first summer. Next summer, I went to what they call Northern Warfare. They didn't open up to women except the summer phase. So I jumped on that so I could do that. And so by the end of my, college time, I thought, okay, I'll do the reserves, but I want to get out there now. I have this college career and I want to get out and do it. And the Army said, no, you're going active duty. I thought that was the end of the world. But, I went on active duty and I stayed for 25 years on active duty. And if you had said that to me when I was a young person coming out of college, I would have laughed at you and said that's ridiculous. But hopefully when we tell some of our stories later today, you'll see every time I thought maybe it's time I get out, something amazing happened. And it was always from the people around me. When I had served at all echelons. So as Mary, walked through hers, I served at every echelon from tactical to operational to strategic. And I ended my career at 25 years out in the DC area. It wasn't my idea of where I was going to retire, but, life, takes you on a new path. And so I remain outside the Metro DC area. And then after that, I went into defense contracting, which I said I'd never do when I was on active duty. But there was an incredible leader that folks always said, if you ever get the chance to work for her, don't pass it up. And so I had an opportunity to work for this leader that had been formerly in the Army as a civilian and in industry. And I thought I'll stay there a year or two. And I just passed my 10 years with the defense company. And so life doesn't always turn out the way you thought the plan was, but it ends up being pretty incredible. So
that's awesome, man.
That is. Thank you so much for sharing your journeys. Fascinating. And I'm excited for us to hear more nuggets from each segment of those journeys. Okay. So first question. And I'm curious to hear from each of you. So when you're faced with strategic uncertainties, right, recognizing the tactical realities, tell us how you make decisions that get you to the outcome that you were hoping for. What is your process? What does that look like for you?
Well, interestingly enough, the Army has a very, very formal process of decision making, and they teach it to you from the time you're a brand new second lieutenant and beat it into you until you have it. It's just muscle memory. So we give you the mission, you analyze the mission, you think about all of the different pieces and parts of that mission. And this is where your staff comes in so very important, is you give that mission to the staff and they analyze their part in bringing you all of the tactical realities and you blend those together and listen to each of the staff members and try and make decisions that will accomplish the mission, protect your people, and keep people alive. That's really the bottom line.
I'm curious if you've replicated that decision process outside of the military, right? Does that, I guess, methodology that was so ingrained in you, does it work in other parts of life?
It absolutely does. I took that with me when I went out into the corporate world. And now you have to relax a little bit because it's not quite the formal, rigid process it is in the military. But the same things, you sit down with your staff and you analyze missions and try to come out with the best way to accomplish whatever it is you're going to accomplish. Because the bottom line is that whether you're in corporate world or you're in the military, you have a mission. Whether it's to make money, gather customers, or win wars, you have a mission that you have to do. So get all the input from your staff and try to make rational decisions. It also involves the staff in what the process is and gets their buy-in to whatever the decision is at the end. And that's very important because that's what motivates people to do their very best.
That's great. Yet another example about how it's a collaborative process and not just top-down orders all the time, right? Probably not a lot of people realize that. So thank you for sharing. Annette, what are your thoughts on decision making?
I love how Mary framed that because that does lay out the foundation of how we all have a common framework for our decision-making process in the military. And for me, as a young officer, I was in my unit for maybe 3 months and we deployed. And guess what? Some units at the time and probably existing today didn't use any of that process. It was complete chaos getting out the door. For example, they loaded the plane, loaded the people, and oops, we had to stop about 2 hours later because they didn't, take into account the weight for the fuel. And for me, and I bring that experience up because in my first 4 years with the military police, we deployed 4 times in 4 years. And these were, real world missions. And so it was ingrained in me very early that this isn't a practice session. We're not doing training for fun and goofing off. These are people's lives. This is time. And, even the people deployed, yes, those are our soldiers, but their families are back home, and to see that whole dynamic. And so when after going through these back-to-back deployments, that influenced me to the military we went through what they call military decision-making, but we have a school, and it's called the Strategic Studies for Advanced, I can't even say it, it's my school too, SAMS, a School of Advanced Military Studies.
Yeah.
And it's considered elite. I say that I don't consider myself elite, but it pulled me to it. All my fears of applying for it went by the wayside because I wanted to know, why did we goof up the fuel that first deployment? Why on our third deployment were we sitting on our rucksacks for, it was supposed to be a couple hours and a day later, and they never wanted to move us because they thought, oh, the plane's coming. A day and a half later, you're still on the tarmac sleeping and, carrying your ruck around until you get picked up. So I want to know who made those decisions. How are they made at the lowest level? How are they made at the highest level? And going to that course as, 8 years into the military helped me frame problem sets going forward, deploying, OIF and OEF were going on then, and to take my lessons learned as a young officer, take all the processes and incredible insights we can get from our military training, curriculum and opportunities, and now continue to apply it to the people and to the mission and do it better each time we go because we have all this baseline to do it. So, and to Mary's point, it is a team sport, right? When you're trying to figure out how to get out the door and deploy, we have what we bring together all the subject matter experts. So there's a lot of compromise and a lot of negotiation for resources, for timing, for what type of equipment are you going to take? And Mary, you have a great story on the equipment. I mean, we were coming out of Panama, urban environment, mount, our equipment, tropical environment, and we get the warning to, hey, could you guys pivot and depart Panama and head out to this thing called Saudi Arabia. We're doing a thing called Desert Shield, and to watch Mary go through I was just a young lieutenant, but to listen and learn how she was like, hey, that's a whole different type of war, or conflict that we're responding to. We need our equipment. We need different equipment. And my soldiers need to be outfitted with different uniforms and something as detailed as footwear and what types of socks we should be deploying with. I mean, listening and learning that at that, I was only in the military at that point, maybe 2.5 years. It's not just about, and I know it's a bigger question. You asked about strategic uncertainties and how do you do a decision tree. I think you focus on the issue immediately in front of you, but watching Colonel Maier at the time also at the same time turn to the staff and say, okay, now, big picture, right? What else do we need to accomplish the end state? So we have a near-term target. Tell me your thoughts. And then we have this other, issue. We might be doing a full-up ground war, not an urban environment anymore. What does that look like? I don't know. I was new. I don't know, but I went to go find out. I could all the information, get the maps. I was a map person at the time. We used to do a lot of maps when what I was doing. But everybody was mobilized in their area of expertise to bring a piece of the solution together, and to have that experience and knowledge at a young age and in real world environment. We go through that in all our big training environments, but this is real world mission. To be under the leadership of Mary, I think, we'll talk about it, as we go through this, and I know she gets all irritated and, but I think that's what bonds you and builds this trust. And if you build that trust, we can solve really any problem. We might not solve it perfect, but we'll get through it because the people to our right and left have the right intent and they're doing the very best. And so, and we can recover if we don't get it perfect, right? Because you're never going to get perfect. But for me, those trying to bring together that whole picture that she described from that human component of just figuring out the immediate and really lifting your head up over the horizon then how do you still take care of folks?
That was gold.
Amazing perspective on how to make decisions. And what I heard from that, it's not only making decisions in terms of the pre-planning, but it's also like what happens when the decision doesn't go the way that you expect, and making sure you have that feedback loop without the finger pointing and without the emotions and without the defensiveness, right? And one thing that we're seeing a lot in business environments, especially recently, and I think it might have been IDEO, the famous design firm that coined the term fail fast. But everyone loves to say fail fast, right? Just jump in, try, and if it doesn't work, just stop right away. But I think what we don't often leave ourselves time for in a business context, or even in certain personal situations or volunteer situations, is doing that retrospective or that after action report and saying, okay, why did this go wrong? How do we make sure it doesn't go differently next time? What do we need to fix within the systems and the structures, right? To, again, have a better outcome next time. So that was really cool. Thank you for sharing.
So I'm gonna jump in and say, I remember one thing about service is like everything was yesterday. I don't know how Annette and Mary feel about that. And it's not like I hang on to stuff. I'm just saying some of these memories are so vivid and were so impactful, they don't leave. And they leave a stitch on your behaviors, on your memories. But I came into Mary and Annette's life. I was part of the 4th Infantry Division at the time, and I worked for some really amazing people. Dennis Fangman, Blackshaw, Garrity was over there, I think, for a little while. And Mary may not remember this, but the reason I ended up working for Mary is I got in a little bit of trouble, which I know shocks people listening and shocks you. And they were in Panama when I got in trouble, and it wasn't small trouble. It was significant. But Blackshaw and Fangman, knew that Mary would probably have an impact on me, and something happened with her existing driver at the time, so she needed a replacement. They threw me in the ring for the job, and I got it. I don't remember the details why. I'm sure she was scratching her head at the time, like, who the hell is this kid? But I did get a front row seat to watch what Annette was describing, like watching them come back from Panama when I was in a divisional asset unit. going into the field all the time, doing law enforcement ops, like my brain, and I was a 19-year-old kid. I was in for like 10 months when I met Mary. But watching all of that work happen and that decision tree and how busy, like I thought I knew what busy was until I watched these two and Annette's peers operate. And then the meetings that Mary and I were going to, I wasn't in the meetings, I got her there. But watching her come out of those moments, and she carried this binder. I don't know if you remember it, man, but you had this like binder that you carried. It's like stitched in my brain, and it was filled to the brim with knowledge and notes and things. And her follow-up was unbelievable. You know, when you're a kid and you see that and you're getting ready to go off far away, it's so impactful. So Annette, you described all that perfectly. It was just bringing back so many memories for me. All right, Rachel, you want to do the next one?
Yes. Okay. What was the most difficult situation you faced while in uniform as a leader, drivers of a team of teams? Right. This is not just managing and leading and directing a couple of individuals, but it's a whole domino effect. Tell us what was the most difficult thing you had to deal with?
Well, I had to think about this one. There were a lot of what I would consider very difficult decisions. But I think probably the most difficult one I had was we were sitting in Saudi Arabia. We were hours from the air war starting, and I had a company commander, and this is a guy responsible for about 200 lives. And he was making some very, very poor decisions. There was no misconduct. It was just, if it had been a peacetime army, I would have probably taken some time and coached and mentored. But we were sitting on the brink of, and we didn't know what kind of a war it was going to be. We didn't know it would be a short duration war. And I had to determine whether I needed to relieve him or not. And I had to think about, if I relieve him, who am I going to put in there? Because, it's not like you have an endless supply of people. You have what you deployed with. So I would have to take someone out of my staff to put them in the company as a commander. So where could I afford a hole in my staff? Whoever I picked, could they go down and grab this company and get it together and make the decisions and get them to follow them in a very short period of time? We're talking hours from the war starting. And what do I do with this young man afterwards? But there are people's lives at stake. So you have to make the right decision. You don't want to leave this young man in command and have soldiers get killed because he continues to make bad tactical decisions. So, relieving him was probably the most difficult thing I had to do, and probably one of the most successful things I did, because the person I put in command did probably the most awesome job I could have ever asked anybody to do. And he went on to command at the battalion, the brigade level, and served in every war that we've fought in since that time. So.
And now his son works for us.
That's right.
And he is also very excellent.
He's a very good young man.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That must have been, I can't imagine we make decisions like this every day in our business, but when the stakes are really high and people's lives are at risk, it's tremendous. And sounds like you had an even better outcome than could have been imagined. But it took courage to, to pull that lever, right, and make that decision.
Yes, it did.
I learned what courage was from Mary.
Annette, what about you?
Mary's example is such a crystal clear snapshot in time over a difficult decision. Like, as she said, everybody got to watch it play out. I was in the unit, and her decision wasn't just impacting the specific officers, that were leaving and being told to take command, but at a higher headquarters level, it impacted the unit. And you knew she had to make a tough decision. She didn't want to make it. It was like tough love, right? It is for the good of the unit and the good of the people. and I'm going to take care of all of you. Look out for all your best interests. So as hard as it was, and as much as the unit kind of reeled from it at first, everybody, I think, could move forward in confidence that in those hard decisions, as we walk into what was at that point clearly a combat zone, that she was going to do that for us. And like Patrick said, it's like yesterday, when I talk about it, because it was so meaningful. And yeah, it was hard, but it set the tone for some harder decisions I think she made when we were downrange, to make those decisions and know that the troops were going to say had to be done, for the safety and for, the success of us as people and for our, what mission we're assigned to. From my perspective, I guess I would answer this in a broader range, just because I wouldn't want to embarrass anybody. I wouldn't want anybody kind of try to backwards what was I speaking about. But for me, I have a standoffish with, I think, my communication style, as far as when I'm leading, just, you need to be taken seriously. You're making hard decisions, and I'm very cognizant over not being too familiar with, service members, whether it's because I'm a female or just my style, you can name it what it is. But at the end of the day, the hardest decisions for me have been, sometimes I see other leaders, they don't really share what the issue is with a service member or even employee in civilian world, right? We'll move them to somewhere else and it'll go away. But I felt like during my time in the military, the candor and feedback, even if I disagreed with it or it upset me, it was still feedback that I had to contemplate and figure out, okay, how do I assess that? So, and then seeing how Mary dealt with people just as my first assignment in the military, I think the hardest things for me is to sit across from someone. And I would never say to someone, you're not cut for this, right? Because I had someone say that to me early on after I had served with the military police, you need to get out, and they had opinions on it. So that's not what I'm saying when I say sit with them candidly. It's the hardest thing for me is to sit across from a young adult and say, these are the challenges I see you present to the mission. This is where I see possibly some shortfalls, right? Because I just see a snapshot of who they are. So I don't want to make a judgment over who they are. But those are tough conversations because you don't want to dampen someone's potential. But at the same time, especially in the military, at least, we're in the business to fight and win the nation's wars. And if you can't figure out how to properly secure your weapon, and you're a menace, as far as you can't show up when everybody's counting on you because we're getting ready to move out and you're not there, part of the convoy, then maybe this isn't for you, right? And so I feel like you have to have those conversations in the military, and they have to be very candid, and then at the same time, help them figure out what they need to do or pull them off the line. There's plenty of work to do behind the scenes. But they're still on the team. And that's the other thing, because you don't want to. So for me, I guess, and I'm in a different environment, right? I'm in a different trade craft. So, we have a lot of administrative functions that can be done that some of those folks, you're still on the team, but you're doing the read book today, you're making a binder today. You're not going to be out, doing a more dynamic operation support. So I do think that the people side of it is probably, those are the decisions that are the most difficult. And even if I might keep a straight face to them while I'm doing it, I rethink and replay it. Was that the right thing? I'll go to my NCOs and say, hey, this is what I said. This is what I did. Can you come around back and make sure, they're okay, and help them think it through? Because, and I do, those NCOs would be invaluable, because I would never want to just shut down someone's hope or their future goals or whatever. But at the same time, we have a mission. And so in the corporate world, I know we're talking about the military. In the corporate world, lives aren't at stake. So I see a lot of sort of shuffling around of folks that are really challenged. And I've been here long enough to see that, they try to mentor them, but there's some folks it's really hard. So at what point you go look for another job, you can make money. Very different dynamic than you're in the military. You could cost someone's life. So So yeah, I have to look at it a little differently.
Wow, thank you for sharing. What I heard in both of your responses is something really, really intriguing, right? It's having the courage to make tough decisions, to deal with difficult situations, probably utilizing that decision-making matrix that we talked about, but also keeping in mind the optics and the impact that it has on everyone that's affected by that decision. Right? That is something that not a lot of people think about, right? So in the military, yes, lives are at stake. But, that practice could be so helpful when used at work or even in family situations, right? Sometimes we have to make a really tough decision or a tough call with a family member, but we don't always think about how it impacts everyone else, right? And how it's perceived. So I really, really appreciate how you called out that perspective. Thank you. Okay, tell us about your leadership qualities, right? So each of you, I think we've seen so far how you each have a unique approach to things. Some of it is based on your specific training, some of it is based on your life experiences, on your personalities. But tell us about the leadership qualities that you're most proud of. And then how early on did you realize that these were the tools that you were using to help you achieve your success?
Well, I think, and I don't remember, somebody alluded to this earlier. I think one of my best qualities is that I found talented people and surrounded myself with really smart, good people, and then allowed them to do their job. I think that, knowing your people and knowing their strengths and weaknesses and helping them to shore up their weaknesses and to utilize their strengths. I thought it was interesting on one of your earlier podcasts, Patrick talked about a school that his company sent him to for, what was it, a year? I thought that was amazing to invest into the potential of someone. You recognize that they have talent and invest in that person. I like to think I did that with Annette. So, but it's just important to know your people and to surround yourself with good people. But you also have to have the ability to look people in the eye, like Annette said, and tell them when they're not quite meeting the mark. And, you can work through some of those things. You can help them fix some of those things if they're willing. But sometimes you just have to say, I'm sorry, you're just not, you're not qualified to do this. And of course, in the military, that means people's lives sometimes. In the corporate world, it may mean customers or other things. But it's still important. It's important to make the team as strong as you can and then reward them.
Thank you. Annette, what about you?
I agree with Mary, because you can't succeed in anything without the people, people helping you. It's not anything you're doing in life. You don't ever really accomplish it by yourself, right? You accomplish it by the people around you that help in little and big ways. I think probably early on, I realized that for me to get out of, the socioeconomic, background that, I was living, is that I had to persevere, right? It's like, don't give up. Even though other people say, you'll never be able to do that, or just do what Joe's doing down the road, or Sally, it's fine, that's fine for them, but that's not what I want. So sometimes I think early on, I realized that it's probably not a good word, but it's grit, right? You just have to dig in and follow your path. And even if everybody thinks it's the wrong path, it's your path. If it's the wrong path, then you'll write it later. And so by doing that, that's how I ended up going to college. That's how I ended up going into the Army and then going to higher education. And none of that would have been done if I just didn't listen to my inner voice, or, try to be authentic for what I was trying to do. So I think grit and perseverance, even if you're not the smartest person in the room, you're going to learn by your lessons. You're going to fail a bunch of times, and you just have to pick yourself up and keep going, and you're going to get it right eventually. And so I am a strong believer in that. In the military, soldiers make big mistakes. Patrick admitted he was young, he made a big mistake. And I think that gave me a little more compassion, right? They're still going to get an earful from me on it. I'm not going to, dance around it, but I'll probably give them a choice, right? You can do this hard task and get yourself back on the right track, or there's the door. And so give people an option. And so from that, and I don't know the right words to say on this second one is you get grit and perseverance, but also even if you have that tough love, which Mary gave all of us, it was not always, it was a hard environment, but it was still positive. You can care for your team and not be weak, right? Caring and loving your soldiers or your team is not this weird, squishy, feely, you're weak thing. It is that commitment of you see all of them. Your superstars, they shine every day. But what about the one that, is struggling or super introverted? I work to see them and let them know I see them. They're on this team in a different role, but they're still on this team. And, I was trying to get my head around that concept. And I literally, because this is what I do, there's a master chief for years, a senior NCO, he's like bedrock of, wisdom to me, or, always let me know when he thinks I'm going off trail. I actually sent him a note over, what would you say, is one of my leadership traits? And, I said, and he said, well, what do you think they are? Because that's typical, right? He's not going to give me an answer. He's going to make me Socratically go through it. And it cracked me up. Last night I'm texting him at like 2 a.m, and I said, okay, grit and perseverance. And that we can care about the people, the good and the bad, everything that goes with it. And that's what made us a great team every time, like he and I worked together. And he said, I think you just hit the nail on the head. And I thought, okay, there you go. We'll get into mentoring and I'm sure talking about people's influence in our lives, but that kind of dialogue last night sort of brought like 3 different things together, right? As far as the people you trust, the people you've served with, how do you treat other people? How do you not make it not all about yourself? And you're always trying to get a sounding board over, am I looking at this right? Or I'm just saying a characteristic of myself that you're like, heck no, this is what we see, get that really candid feedback. So that's, I'm sure there are other things Patrick and Mary will throw out, they think, but those were like the 2 that stuck in my head as far as that I recognize those as early elements of how do I get from A to Z. Might not take the right path, but how do you get there, and what are some of the things that will help us get to that point?
I love that you used the word grit, Annette, because, and I'm looking somewhere behind me on my bookshelf, I'll find the book, but there's a book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. She's a psychologist. She also did a TED Talk that was very, very popular. It got like bajillions of views. And she calls out grit as an essential building block of success, right? Some people have it naturally. Sometimes it comes from less than ideal circumstances, right? Overcoming adversity, right? Dealing with very difficult situations that maybe some people would not have chosen. But grit is definitely such an indicator of success. So Bella will put the book in the show notes, but I'm curious to hear what you think of that once you get a chance to review it.
Okay, we're going to go to the individual questions. So it's me first with you, Mary. You ready?
I guess.
So you're doing great, ma'am. All right. So this is, I know I know you've already read it, and I'm sure you looked at it and were like, oh, but I'm so excited to hear your answer on this. All right. So you are seen as a trailblazer by many, Mary. You just are. I know you don't own that. You don't want that mantle. Fine. I got it. You're one of the most humble leaders. That was a massive big shot I've been around in my life. But you are a trailblazer. Your intro tells us that, like from whence you came to what you achieved, and even to be asked back to lead a brigade, what was it, 10 years from separation? And I was at your first retirement at Bragg, if you remember that. Like I stood on the dais with you and watched the 82nd Airborne Band march you out of your career. It was so amazing to witness real time. And then I hear 10 years later that you get brought back. Like that's massive. I don't know anyone that's happened to. And I've done a lot after I got out with veterans and units with Defenders of Freedom and U.S. Bank's Proud to Serve program. I don't know anyone like you, ma'am. So you are a trailblazer. So through those experiences coming up out of the WACs into call it the real-time Army, company command, for the town, all of that. Like, what were the biggest challenges and what were some of the opportunities? Because not everything's bad, but like, what are the two things, that one each maybe, that you remember and how you got around them, or
Uh,
parlayed them into something else?
Well, probably the biggest challenge was coming in the Army in 1973 and being part of that initial push of women into the branches. Uh, I ended up, there were 7 of us that went to the MP school. And then after that, 2 of us went to Korea. One ended up in Seoul and I ended up in Daegu. Now, that's important because the only other female officers that were in Korea at the time were nurses. And I was in Daegu. There were 2 female nurses and myself. And there were not a whole lot of men who cared to be mentors, coaches, teachers. I think they looked at women in the Army and in the branches as an experiment that would go away quickly, and that we would leave them to be back in their maleness. But interestingly enough, in Korea, there was a young buck sergeant who was sat across the hall from me in his office, and he took his job very seriously. And he probably taught me more about being an officer than any other officer I ran into for the next probably 10 years. Because after that, it was always a fight. Everywhere you went, you were an anomaly. There were still very few of us out there doing jobs. I kept fighting to go to line companies. People who went to the field went to war as opposed to administrative jobs, and not very well received. And my first tour in Hawaii, I met a guy named Larry Brady who looked at me as an officer and not a female. And he treated me with respect, and he gave me a lot of the tough love. You need to work on this. You need to do better at this. You're really good at this. And he took me on in jobs that, even in Hawaii, that were not traditionally female. But then he gave me the greatest opportunity in the world. He went to command the 503rd MP Battalion at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which was right in the throes of becoming an airborne unit. And he selected me to be his S3, or his operations officer. Well, first of all, there had not ever been a female S3 in a line unit in the United States Army at that time, let alone in the premier airborne. We don't even acknowledge that women exist outside of the home environment, and made me very successful. And frankly, he's probably the premier mentor that I had. And Patrick knows him, and Annette knows him. He was the brigade commander when we were in Saudi Arabia. I worked for Larry 3 times and never ceased to learn from him and never ceased to be given opportunities. But, I think about all those years of having to each and every time prove myself because I'm a woman. And Annette and I talked about this last night. Is females in the Army, the reputation does not precede you. You have to prove yourself every time you go someplace. You're a new entity no matter what. And it takes a lot of that grit that Annette talked about to do that. But I think that was the biggest challenge. That and the fact that as a woman coming in the Army in 1973, I was competing with guys who had been in ROTC for 4 years or OCS. And I was a fresh out of college, know nothing second lieutenant. And I went to WAC officer orientation where they taught me how to wear my uniform and serve tea. So it was, I was ill prepared to be in a line unit in Korea and had to learn very fast. So
Rachel, do you see why she's seen as a trailblazer, even though she won't admit it? And Annette, I'm not going to speak for you. I never would think I could, ma'am, at all. But officers like Annette, and even my own daughter, who joined later, that Annette and Mary both helped with letter writing and navigating her into service, had the careers they did because Mary and maybe a few small handful of other people went first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what makes you a trailblazer, Mary. I know it's hard to talk about, but I appreciate that answer, and it's very impactful. And that wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, right? And you're a legend. You're a legend. You are. Like, I got to go to your Hall of Fame induction. Like, for everyone, I got to see her retire. And then I got to go up to Leonard Wood and watch her get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Like, and now I'm staring at you at this podcast talking about your amazing career. I can just stop now. Rachel, I'm not coming back. I'm done. Mary, thank you for that.
And thank you for sharing how that felt, right? Because I think that, I mean, obviously you took a tremendous amount of courage, and I'm sure parts of it were uncertain, right? And actually dangerous, right? That you didn't have the right training. But others may look and say, oh, she's a superhero, right? I'm sure it was fine. But it's okay to admit that we're all human, right? And things are hard, but that's where that grit comes from, right? We can overcome it. And the next time we have to approach something hard, we have that muscle memory.
So the next one's for you, Annette. And look, it wasn't, none of these were like directed on purpose. I just came up with the questions and assigned a name, promise. So this is like a work-life balance question. Rachel and I talk about that a lot, like where we work, where we've used to work. Organizations never have enough money to do what you need to do. They never have enough people. There's never enough minutes in the day. The things that we all do, not for profit, military, Leos, corporate, we have lives. And then you have these really big jobs or jobs that you need to feed your private lives. Like, it's an interesting swirl. And not a lot of people understand what it's like to be in the military and have a life, or in your function you're in now. And you've got 2 boys, you've got this massive job. Like, you handled, know about, manage some of the most sensitive material in the world. And I don't think I'm overplaying it, because I know what your jobs were. It's a huge responsibility, and you were away from home a lot. And it's interesting. Like, lots of people struggle with that. Like, I stopped calling it work-life balance, and Rachel knows this. Like, I call it work-life freedom. Like, you have the choice to partake in certain aspects of your life, yet are still held accountable to your role. Now, the military is a different animal. Corporate people don't get deployed far from home for years at a time, months at a time. They come home at the end of the day. But the emotional trials of balancing all that are real for all facets, and it's a struggle. And I would ask a man this, and I have asked men this, so this isn't a female-only question, I promise. It's a navigating career and work-life freedom. What say you, Annette?
So when I think through this, first coming in the Army, I'll just be candid. There is no work-life balance. Your life, for me at least, was the Army, and a lot of that, and a lot of people's are, not just mine, but a lot of that for me is exactly what Mary was talking about. As every assignment I went to, I had someone roadblocking me on something. Now, there were probably 10 people behind them that gave me support and mentorship, but there was always a question: can she really do this job? Should she really be here? And so it didn't matter if I had 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years. And then in combat in Afghanistan, there was another, who are, and most of them are my peers, right? Can she really do that job? She's got to deal with the brigade commander. She's a girl. Will she really know what they're talking about? That's the attitude some people have. I would say the majority do not, but it just takes one to, at least, someone like me. It's like, I'm going to dig in. I'm going to have to do more. I'm going to have to do better. I'm going to have to, really be, on my game, and make sure I'm, not taking for granted that my level of education and my level of experience is going to help carry this through. What's going to help carrying this through is I work hard and carry on. So I know that's not the answer anybody wants to hear. Is there any balance? it also causes me to reflect. I was in the Pentagon. I'm in super early. We have presentations for, important people early in the morning and super early. And I had a great boss, but the only time he wanted to meet, sometimes it'd be like, hey, buzz up here around, 2000, 8 p.m. Okay. I've been in, at the wee hours of the morning. So that's a pretty long day by 8 p.m. But okay, he's the boss. Roger out. That's the mission. But a couple of times he would say, Annette, don't be like me. You at the time I had young kids. He said, you got young kids. You got to do work-life balance. I'm like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And as I walk out, I'm like, what time I came in here, right? You set the time to meet. You could have met me tomorrow morning. So people say work-life balance, but they really want you to do it now and when they need it done. And so that is just part of the job and the culture, at least in the Army that I was in. And I didn't really think anything of it. Did I think what he said was hypocritical? No, I wouldn't frame it like that. I think he was sincere, but he also was just as sincere about getting the mission done. So, for me, there was no balancing Army or home life. And when I was deployed, I'm deployed. It's just the way it is. And for me, I started late with the kids, right? So I had a good decade plus of Army life where I could do, 20 hours a day, and that was my life. And you're right. When the kids came along, it's like, how do you balance taking care of everybody in your Army command, right? You're taking care of everybody and everybody's mission needs and personal issues, but what about my family? What about my boys? And so that did creep into what am I doing? And that was part of my decision making to depart the Army, right? And because they were still in elementary school, and I thought, yeah, I could stay in and keep doing this job that I just love. But there's more to life than this job, right? And of course that hits home after coming out of a combat zone, especially, Afghanistan. And so, it influences, because you can't actually, I don't think you can have it all. I know people say you can have it all, and maybe they can, but I couldn't do it. And in the corporate world, my bad habits are my bad habits. It's not my boss's, right? So I don't have any bosses, calling me at 8, knowing I was in, but I have bad habits because there's always a person to take care of. There's always something to solve or create. So I know I'm a work in progress. My boys are older now, so half the time they don't care, if I'm busy or not, but they do, because I make sure I at least as a minimum pause and have dinner. Because after, we can converge and then they'll go off and do their own thing. But to them, they had that time with, as a family. And so I am still a work in progress because, my civilian life, I know I have a lot more opportunity. And I'm also very grateful for my job because they let us telework. And teleworking, I probably work harder teleworking because I'm not dealing with the commute. I'm not dealing with a million other things logistically. I probably work harder and get more done teleworking, and at the same time can come out of my office and have 15 minutes with my son for lunch in the afternoon. How amazing is that?
That's right.
So,
Pretty amazing.
So anyway, I wish I gave you a better answer, that I had cracked the code on that. I haven't, but I try.
No, but that is the answer. I don't think anyone knows how to crack the code. That's the point of the question, right? So Mary, you've led hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people into the Middle East, into Panama. I think you did a Bright Star or two into Egypt, right?
I didn't go, but I was there. I was the commander when they went to Bright Star.
Okay. So all of that leadership experience, all of those things that you had to do, regardless of size of unit, it could have been 10 people or 1,000 people. What were the lessons that you learned from those moments? Like the intensity of people's lives, like even the note that we all exchanged earlier in the week where you're like, Annette, with your combat experience. And I said, no, guys, this is like a leadership discussion. Because even at home, whether you're inside CONUS or you're in Korea, the missions are dangerous. Like even training, people get hurt all the time in training, held traffic accidents, whatever, all the things that happen while you're doing jobs like that. what was the balance of the risk and the weight of that responsibility, the mantle of leadership that you carried, or some of the lessons that you carried out of that, those those learnings and those decisions you were making, sending people abroad, you going with them, sometimes not.
Well, part of the question that you gave me was about compartmentalizing stress, and I never learned to do that. I never learned to compartment. You manage through it. You find things, and I found PT and sleep were the two things that helped me get through the stress. But that weight of leadership, I don't know how you do that. I just, you're just there and you do it because you're responsible for people's lives, and you can't escape that responsibility. You have to embrace it. And I prayed a lot. And I think every day I was in battalion command, I prayed. We deployed to Panama right after the war there and did law enforcement in Panama City. We saw more people get shot in Panama City than we did in Desert Storm. But and then we turned right around. We pivoted and went to Desert Shield, Desert Storm for 6 months. So I had soldiers literally that were deployed for over a year to two different locations. So their families were, that was the hard part, was taking them away from their families right after they brought them home, and then we turned right around and went back again. I'm not sure how you do that. Again, I think you just have to embrace it, have a little bit of that grit that Annette talked about, and go through it and take care of your soldiers. That's the most important thing. You talk about the key is I loved my soldiers, every one of them, good, bad, or indifferent. You had to love them. And you had to, that didn't mean that you gave in to them and gave them everything they wanted. You trained them hard for what they had to do. You gave them the tools that they needed to do them, and you trusted them to do their job. And then you just go with the flow. That's really all you can do. This is not it was much easier in the corporate world because obviously lives were not at stake, but
I hope everybody listens to that answer. Just like you're an answer in that there is no real solution to these things. It's how you navigate them as a person.
So the final question for both of you is really what leadership advice you would give to those following you, right? And that might be to the many more women that are now joining the military. I think the numbers are up to 17, 18%. So those numbers are climbing. And maybe also to women who find themselves to be in the minority around whatever table that they're in or in whatever career area that they find themselves in. What is some advice do you have that you have for them?
Okay, I have to share a vignette about I was selected to go to senior service college. This is a big deal for O5s and potential to become a colonel, a full colonel. I got there and they put you into small groups, 16 people. I was the only female in that group. And the very first day, I was sitting there and we took a break. And the guys all went to the bathroom. And I went to the bathroom. And I was alone. And they were talking and sharing and bonding. And I was not a part of that. Later that day, we were doing a discussion and somebody asked a question. I brought up a point and I said something. And they all said, and went on, but really didn't embrace whatever I said. Maybe an hour later, somebody made the exact same point. And it produced all kinds of discussion and, oh, that's a good idea. And yeah. And I realized that, you really have to continue to fight to be recognized. You have to be yourself, and you have to not let those kinds of incidents isolate you. Because more often than not, women are going to be a minority. So you need to be strong. You need to be out there. But in a leadership position, you have to allow yourself to be yourself. And I talked earlier about loving soldiers. You need to love your soldiers. You need to be able to be personable, and you need to be able to reach out and touch them. And I have a terrible habit, even after all the sexual harassment things, about throwing my arm around a soldier and talking to them, and hugging them and talking to them. And I got to the point as a brigade commander, I'd always say, "Do you mind if I put my arm around you?" So I didn't insult anybody, but be yourself, love your soldiers, take care of them, know their strengths and weaknesses, not soldiers, but people. Even in a corporate world, I was much more careful in a corporate world about throwing my arm around people, though. So, but don't be afraid. Step up, know your craft, and be a part of it. I always tell Annette that she's normally the smartest person in the room, and she intimidates the hell out of people. But it doesn't stop her from speaking truth to power. If you want to know something, ask her. She'll tell you the answer. And that's probably her strongest quality.
Brilliant.
Thank you. Annette, what about you?
She said all the great things to pass on. I was cracking up over your War College experience. I was the same thing. Only female in my group. We were wearing civilian clothes, so they didn't know until almost graduation that I was a baby 05. They were all 06s that had commanded brigades, tough guys. This is the years of OIF, OEF, where they were, combat tours, multiple. Even though I did combat tours, in their mind, it wasn't the same. But I guess because I started off very introverted, even though I would advocate for myself, I was introverted. The Army, for me at least, I had to make a decision. Was I going to be invisible and just that girl in the corner, or was I going to speak up? And so by the time I got to the War College, I could care less if they all went to the bathroom together and BS'd and solved the world's problems when I wasn't there. Because when they came back, I'd say, "What'd you talk about?" And that's the difference of the atmosphere between when Mary was, truly breaking the ice for the follow-on generation of mine, right? And I remember my advisor said to me at one point, he said, we're supposed to have 2 women in each group. And that was from Mary's era, right? It's not fair. They need to have a, just someone that, we're using it sort of literal and, metaphorical, to go to the restroom with. You need someone that understands some of these nuances that you're experiencing. And they didn't have enough females that year. And he said they literally spent 2 days going through people's files and saying, what female could be in a class room with, 15 other, combat seasoned men and not file an EO complaint, or not feel like being bullied, or not intimidated. And he said, we pulled your file and said, she's going to be just fine. And I said, how could you tell that from a piece of paper, though? And he said, I said, what took you 2 days to talk about? And he said, well, you're only like 5 foot, 100 and something pounds. He said, there was a discussion over physical bearing. And Mary is, she thinks she's so big because she's an inch or so bigger than me. But, just hearing them go through that decision-making process, hindsight, and I was almost done with the course. They said, she'll be fine. And it probably is because I was born and raised under, 18th Airborne Corps, and then went to light infantry, and then had 3 combat tours by the time I got there. But you don't know that dynamic, right? And I didn't bat an eye about being the only female in the room from a very different perspective than Mary did. Mary, you didn't bat an eye because there weren't that many females. I didn't bat an eye because I don't want to be a man. I'm not one of the boys. That's not my desire. but I felt like I had a seat at the table. And so I didn't think about it because I'm always outnumbered. There aren't a lot of female officers. So anyway, when we talk about the mantle of leadership, sometimes it's the context of the environment that you're operating in and the legacies that are passed down generation to generation, as far as how do you keep some of the tradition, but also infuse some, contemporary updates into that environment. And so I think the bedrocks of what she said, as far as caring about your people, be authentic. I'm not a dude. I don't want to be a dude. I know some of my female peers were like, they really felt they had to fit in with the boys. You don't. You got to fit into where do where are you going? And your male peers, they'll support you. I mean, they can be your greatest advocates, but just be authentic. And then I would also offer, find a trusted sounding board, probably someone that you're not in the same unit with or whatever. Just someone who along the way has just can make you see a different perspective, because sometimes those guys doing that, they're not even thinking about, and I guess that's the point, they're not thinking about that Mary was left behind or going in a different direction. They're just oblivious to it. So how do you bring them back to the rest of the story? And I know people say this, and I'm going to sound like a cliche, and I don't mean it like that at all. But the mantle of leadership doesn't mean that you're perfect. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna make some bad decisions. You're going to fail, and it's gonna be personal embarrassment. It's gonna be such a letdown to the people you're trying to support. But I feel like part of growing as a leader is to acknowledge your failures and acknowledge those challenges and just learn for it and be compassionate but tough on yourself as well as your people. And failure sometimes is tragic. I'm not even going to try to sugarcoat it, but failure also can sometimes in the long run strategically turn out to be the greatest lesson that helps you go forward.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Did it sound stupid? I wasn't trying to sound cliche.
No, it was so great.
Between the two of you, I don't even know
Yeah.
what to say.
I know. I'm just, wow.
That was intense.
But the authenticity through which you shared your experiences is incredibly powerful. I mean, we talked about your accomplishments and your achievements, and I mean, but to also see the authentic behind the scenes view of how it felt, right? Is a gift. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to close it out without coming apart because I love you both so much, right? So I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and we're going to go. All right, Mary, Annette, thank you. I mean, that is a gift. And, Rachel and I both have a pretty broad corporate network. I have a pretty broad not-for-profit network. A lot of people are going to watch this. Like, a lot of people are going to consume it. There's even groups of people. There's like a few colleges around the country that have caught on to this thing through word of mouth, and they're giving it to their business students to listen to. So some of the metrics look kind of funky, but there could be classrooms of 50 to 100 people listening to this at a time through the summer and probably through the fall, and however long this stuff lives on Apple and YouTube and all that. This was an amazing opportunity for people to hear real life commentary from people who have climbed the hill. Like, your stories are a hill climb, and grit, perseverance, intestinal fortitude, all the things that get said or books that get written about it. And everyone, make sure you check out the book that Bella will drop in the comments for you guys to consume. There it is right there. It is the center. It is the nucleus of surviving a career, because there is some surviving it. There's some luck, health, family health, whatever. There's things that come up in people's lives that steer you away from things. These are two people that had all of that happen. Highly talented, skilled, emotionally intelligent, smart, got a little lucky on occasion, found great mentors, Annette with Mary and a few other people that she referenced, Mary with Larry Brady, and I'm sure there were others. And then for those of you who are watching that know me, and my mom's going to be one of them. She's so excited, Mary, that you're doing this. Like, if you're connecting dots about my behavior the last 27 years in corporate America, a lot of it comes from watching excellence. It was a gift the thing I did, which we're not going to ever talk about on a podcast, but the trouble I got into and got saved by Garrity and Blackshaw and Fangman, and Mary came into my life and straightened me out in a really big way, and meeting Annette and all of that stuff, like that was a blessing. And not a lot of people would say going to a combat theater was a blessing. It wasn't where we went, it's who I went with. And that's the outcome of service, in my opinion. Like, it's the best sorority and best fraternity you could be a part of. And I'll go to my grave knowing that was it for me. So sorry, I'm getting emotional. Mary, thank you. I appreciate you a great deal. Seeing you is so great. Annette, you're wonderful. So we're going to close. I'm going to go maybe have a drink. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much.
Happy listening, everybody.